It's officially time. I am giving you my certified my guys for the 2023 fantasy football season. All of these players I am backing with my own name. I'm projecting incredible fantasy years from them, and I will be drafting them in every league I possibly can. So do me a favor, go ahead and drop a like. I have a like goal of 100 likes on this video. With your help, I do think we can get there. Subscribe if you like fantasy football. And before you hear my guys, I want you to comment. Just tell me your favorite player to draft this year and why you like to draft that player. All right, so I have 6 my guys for you today. A quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a tight end. And then I also have some honorable mentions. Hang in there with me. I'm going to bring you a lot of information, but I think this is going to be very useful for your fantasy drafts. Okay, my first absolutely 100% certified my guy at the quarterback spot, Justin Fields. You'll either love that or you'll hate it, but here we are. His ADP on every platform, Underdog, Sleeper, ESPN, is quarterback 6. He is my quarterback 5 in my rankings. Justin Fields, when the Bears finally let him be himself, he was an absolute superstar in fantasy. Those first 4 weeks, they were limiting him. He was only averaging 37 rushing yards per game. Meanwhile, from week 5 onwards, he's starting to average over 90 rushing yards a game, and his rushing attempts per game also shoot through the roof. If you look at Justin Fields from week 5 to 18, week 5 onwards, he was a quarterback 5 in that time span. On a per game basis, he was a quarterback 3. He had more fantasy points per game in that time span than Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. That's a large sample size too. He had 9 top 10 finishes, which is 82% of the time he started. He had 5 top 5 finishes, and he finished as the #1 quarterback on a week twice. In that time span, more than Pat Mahomes, more than Lamar Jackson. And like we mentioned, he was first in rushing yards per game. In fact, during that time span, only Josh Allen was even close to him, and he was 400 yards behind. More importantly, he put up that incredible fantasy season with what I would argue is the worst set of weapons any quarterback had last year. His leader in target share was Cole Kmet at 19%. Darnell Mooney had 17% in second, and he missed 5 games. Dante Pettis, who should be a wide receiver, should be on a practice squad if we're honest, was the 3rd most targeted wide receiver on this team. You had Chase Claypool in there a little bit, half the year, Equinemius St. Brown, Byron Pringle, N'Keal Harry, Velus Jones. It was not a good wide receiver room, but the good news is here in 2023, that is turning around. Welcome in DJ Moore, the best wide receiver that Justin Fields has played with since his collegiate days. DJ Moore in the last 3 years is averaging 8.3 targets a game, 74 receptions a year, over 1,000 yards in a season, and 5 receiving touchdowns. Not only have they brought in DJ Moore, but they improved their offensive line. They spent a top 10 pick on a tackle, which was super necessary for Justin Fields because he was seeing a ton of pressure on a consistent basis. They also improved their defense in free agency, which means that Justin Fields and the offense should be on the field much more often. We love to see that. And a lot of people consistently say they trash on Justin Fields, saying he's not a good passer. In my opinion, he showed a lot of promise at Ohio State, which I know is set up for quarterbacks to succeed. But let's look at his last year at Ohio State. He only played 8 games because it was a COVID season. But in those 8 games, out of 80 quarterbacks tracked who had 200 dropbacks, he was 6th in completion percentage, almost 70% of his passes completed. He was 9th in yards per attempt. He had a great PFF pass grade, 6th best. He was 10th in big time throw percentage. He threw the 9th fewest turnover worthy plays, and he had the 7th best NFL passer rating. Look, the other thing I wanted to highlight about his time in college football is what did he do when the lights were the absolute brightest? Well, in the college football playoff versus Clemson and Trevor Lawrence, he balled out when it mattered the most. 385 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, completed over 78% of his passes that night. When the lights were the brightest, he shone the brightest, if that makes sense. And the last thing I want to talk about quickly is he can make wide receivers relevant if they are good wide receivers. That last season, the 13-game pace for Chris Olave, they all would have been career highs. Same for Garrett Wilson as far as the touchdown categories. I hear all the time, Justin Fields is a terrible passer. I think that's overblown. I don't think you could put a quarterback behind that offensive line with those weapons and you would have seen any success. Is he an elite passer? No, but he is going to improve now that DJ Moore is the one, Mooney slides to the 2, Claypool can do whatever he can, Cole Kmet can be a complementary piece. And lastly, the playoff schedule is so good for Justin Fields. I want to win the whole damn thing. So I want a quarterback that has a good schedule in the playoffs. In week 14, he plays the Lions, then the Browns, the Cardinals in week 16, and the Falcons in week 17. I mean, that's absolutely matchups that you want to chase this year. So Justin Fields, a certified my guy in 2023. We'll go on to my second my guy, which is at the wide receiver position. I'm talking about Jerry Jeudy. He is my wide receiver 18. Underdog, Sleeper, and ESPN are all hovering around wide receiver 20 to 24. So I am quite higher than consensus. A lot of people forget about how damn good Jerry Jeudy was back half of last season. He finished as a wide receiver 22 in 2022, but he dealt with injuries from week 10 to 12. So what I want to show you is his incredible performance in the back half of the season. So weeks 1 to 8 versus weeks 13 to 18. His targets per game go up, his receptions per game go up, his yards per game go up, his touchdowns per game go up, his fantasy points go up from 11.6 to 18.5. That's almost in the elite category. In his fantasy finish, he was a wide receiver 6 in that back half of the season. In that back half, like I mentioned, from weeks 13 to 18, he was the wide receiver 6 in points per game. He had more points per game than Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and all of these guys played the same amount of games. Jerry Jeudy needs much more respect than he's currently being given. Not to mention that he has a new offensive mind, offensive guru in town in Sean Payton. The last time Sean Payton took over a dumpster fire team was in 2005 when he took over the Saints and they had the second worst record. The next season, he brought them to the playoffs. They went 10-6 and they had the 6th best offense in the NFL. And then you see his entire career. He has a 16-year sample size of him being top half in points per game from an offense perspective. Only 1 year he wasn't top half of the NFL, and that was 2021. In those 16 years, he averaged 6th best offensive points per game, and 3 of those years he was first. 6 of those years he was top 3. Sean Payton knows what he's doing. He will turn this offense around, and Jerry Jeudy is going to be a big part of it. I'm not going to say, Michael Thomas, because people might be upset about that, but he will be the important piece at the wide receiver position for this team, and they're going to need him because in the AFC West, you are going to have to throw the ball a ton. So count me certified, stamp on him, all in on Jerry Jeudy. Okay, at the tight end position, you can either have an impact guy who's winning you every week, or they could be losing you weeks. My third guy, I believe, will win people weeks at the tight end position and probably fantasy championships. That is Darren Waller. I've been in on him all offseason, and I think some people are starting to catch up with me, but he has been my tight end 3 since he got traded to the New York Giants. As far as in ADP for Underdog, Sleeper, and ESPN, he's anywhere from 5 to 7, somewhere around there. But firstly, a lot of times we ask a question, can a player reach a certain ceiling? With Darren Waller, we don't need to ask that question. We know he can be an elite receiving tight end. We don't have to ask the question, can he do it? In 2019 and in 2020, he finished top 3 at the position and he helped people win fantasy leagues. Then he missed 14 games in 2021 and 2022, and he just wasn't able to stay on the field. However, as we know, you cannot predict injuries. It's not something that you can predict. I think a lot of people are disrespecting Darren Waller and forgetting how damn good he really is. Check this out. Only 4 tight ends in the last 20 years have had a minimum season of 107 receptions, 145 targets, and 1,100 receiving yards. Only 4 tight ends have done that in a season in the last 2 decades. Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Zach Ertz, and Darren Waller. So again, if the question is, can he reach that top 3 ceiling? Yes, we have seen it before. And more importantly, now he is the focal point of his offense like he was in Las Vegas in those years he was elite. New year, New York Giant for Darren Waller. This team clearly traded for him because their biggest glaring need was a true number 1 receiving threat. We saw that all last offseason. As good as Daniel Jones was in certain games, they had no true number 1. They finished the year 8th fewest in passing attempts per game. Darius Slayton, check this out. I'm gonna show you the receiving room for Danny Dimes last year, okay? Darius Slayton led them in receiving yards with 724, and he led them in targets with 71. Those 2 numbers aren't even in the top 40 of wide receivers across the league. He was 58th in targets, and he led this team in targets. They had no number 1 that they could trust. Meanwhile, Richie James led them in receptions, and if you look across the league, he was 44th in receptions. So in the 3 major categories for your receiving unit, not a single one of those categories you are top 40 in. Not a single one of them. There's only 32 teams, guys. 32 teams, and yet you're not top 32 in any major category. That's why you go out and you trade for Darren Waller. You give Danny Dimes a long-term contract. There's a lot of talk around, was that worth it or not? Well, you need it to be worth it, and you need him to have a number 1. That's why you bring in Darren Waller. I mean, look at this depth chart. Who is stopping Darren Waller from leading this team in targets? Paris Campbell, nice player. He has a career high of 63 receptions. Isaiah Hodgins, nice player, career high of 37 receptions. Wan'Dale Robinson's coming off an ACL injury. Sterling Shepard has torn Achilles and ACL in the last 2 years. Jalen Hyatt is a 3rd-round rookie who has an extremely limited route tree. They missed out on JSN. They missed out on Quentin, Jordan Addison, and I think they knew they were going to miss out on them. That's why they made the trade for Darren Waller. Darren Waller is going to remind people that he is a true number 1 elite receiving threat. He will lead this team in targets, and I see him getting at least 110 targets, a X-factor league-winning tight end. Stamp him. He's a my guy. Okay, the 4th my guy I'm going to tell you guys about today. We're going back to the running back position, or this is the first running back I'm telling you guys about, actually. Certified my guy at the running back spot, David Montgomery. Don't turn the video off. Don't hate me. Don't call me a clown. Let me tell you why I think he's a great value this year. He's my RB21 in rankings. In ESPN, he's the lowest at RB28 in ADP, and he's the highest in Underdog at RB23. Or actually in Sleeper, he's RB30. That's his lowest, which in Sleeper drafts, he's such a good value in my opinion. But Montgomery, talk about a guy who has been the cornerstone of reliability at the running back spot. That's David Montgomery, and it goes under discussed. In his first 4 years in the league from 2019 onwards, he is averaging over 1,200 all-purpose yards, 7.5 touchdowns, and the RB18 finish in fantasy football. Every single year, he has been consistent, getting yards after yards after yards. And then if you look at his receiving work as well, he's also been a very reliable receiver, which oftentimes I believe is way underlooked. In the last 4 years, he is averaging 39 receptions on 49 targets, 310 yards, and a touchdown. We're talking about a running back who has a career high of 68 targets. Yes, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be the number 1 receiving back on this team, but don't count out David Montgomery. He will be involved in the air, unquestionably. He's been proven reliability, consistent RB2 year after year for fantasy football, and now he lands in the perfect spot for his career in Detroit. Detroit's offense scored the 5th most points per game last year. Their offensive line, according to PFF, was top 8. This is easily the best offensive line David Montgomery has ever been behind. And we saw how important the Jamal Williams role was for fantasy football. Let me ask you, as much as I love Jahmyr Gibbs, I love him. I think he could get 100 targets as a rookie. That's where his value is going to come from. But Jahmyr Gibbs at 200 pounds and David Montgomery at 224. Who do you think is going to get the goal line touchdowns that Jamal Williams is leaving behind? I'm going to go out on a limb and put my name behind it and say that David Montgomery will be this year's Jamal Williams. We know he's a very capable running back, very capable on the goal line. He's proven that. And if you look at Jamal Williams last year, we're talking about a guy who had 17 touchdowns, led the league. He was 10th in rushing yards, and they still had DeAndre Swift on the team. So I personally believe that we're going to see a huge role for David Montgomery. He'll easily see over 200 touches in an offense that has proven to us that they will use multiple running backs. I mean, I could see very easily this team utilizing Montgomery like they used Jamal Williams and utilizing Gibbs like they used Swift. Keep in mind, yes, they spent a top 12 pick on Jahmyr Gibbs, but they also, which this gets underlooked, they also spent big time money on David Montgomery in free agency when no other team is doing it outside of Carolina. So they broke the trend to get David Montgomery on their team. They paid more than most teams did this year, out literally every other team except for the Carolina Panthers. If Monty plays 17 games, he is a lock for a top 24 finish. If you're doing heavy wide receiver builds, then I think Montgomery is an incredible late round pick for you. Let's say round 7, 8 onwards. So I'm a big fan of him. I think he's going to absolutely return value. He's kind of the unspoken name in that backfield. And I do like Jahmyr Gibbs, don't get me wrong. I just think that David Montgomery is the better value here as we stand today. Okay, my fifth, my guy. I've been talking about him a lot on this channel throughout the offseason. It's a wide receiver, Jordan Addison. Currently, his underdog ADP is a wide receiver 37. He's hovering anywhere around wide receiver 37 to wide receiver 43. ESPN has him all the way down there at wide receiver 43. To me, that's a pretty drastic drop, but if you're in ESPN leagues, definitely look to exploit that. I currently have him ranked as my wide receiver 29. So I am drastically higher than the rest of the community in almost every single category. But Jordan Addison is stepping into the perfect role in the Minnesota Vikings offense. Wide receiver 2 was a huge need for this team heading into the draft because Adam Thielen had just left in free agency, leaving behind 107 targets that are vacated in his absence. KJ Osborne, look, is a fine player, but he's going to be better served as a wide receiver 3. And if you're out there, like some people have been commenting on certain videos, telling me that I should be worried about KJ Osborne, I truly don't think you know much about Jordan Addison. I would highly encourage you to go put on some Jordan Addison film from Pittsburgh and from USC and look at the insane route runner that this kid is. He will be the wide receiver 2 on this team before you know it. Keep in mind, even Justin Jefferson wasn't a starter until week 3. Right? Olave didn't break out until the first, couple weeks were over. So don't be upset if he's not like, the number 2 as week 1 approaches. Okay. But Justin Jefferson at the end of 2022 was getting a lot of double teams, a lot of double coverage, a lot of safeties over the top. And they didn't have an elite route runner opposite side of him anymore that could take coverage away. Hawkinson was fine over the middle, but Thielen wasn't the same route runner that he was anymore. That's why Jordan Addison is such an important part of this team. If Jordan Addison means that Justin Jefferson gets one-on-ones and then he gets the ball, forcing teams to look at him, giving Jordan Addison one-on-ones, he will be a nightmare if they try and cover him one-on-one man coverage on this team. And more importantly, the Vikings offense will present instant targets for Addison. Kevin O'Connell, when he's been the head coach for this team, has made this team one of the league's heaviest pass offenses in the entire league, right? And I don't see any end in sight in that. In fact, drafting a wide receiver in the first round and letting go of Dalvin Cook would only tell us that that's the plan, if not even more drastic this year. Check this out. Only 2 teams passed the ball more times per game than the Vikings last year. Hang with me. The Tampa Bay Bucks and the Los Angeles Chargers. We're talking about 2 teams that have 2 very relevant fantasy receivers. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. The volume is there. There's a big enough piece of this pie for Addison to feast. And only 3 teams had more passing yards per game than them last year. the Chiefs, the Bucks, and the Chargers. Kevin O'Connell knows how to utilize multiple fantasy wide receivers. Not only does he have Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson this year, but he has a history of making Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods both very good fantasy wide receivers back in 2021. And honestly, when I look at the Minnesota Vikings, all I see is a fantasy football factory. They're going to put up so many points in 2023. Not only was their offense incredible, their defense was putrid. And I don't think they got much better. The Vikings last year gave up the second most yards per game to opponents. Only the Lions gave up more, and the Lions were awful. They added Byron Murphy, sure, but they lost Dalvin Tomlinson. I personally don't think they got much better. And they also just traded away Danielle Hunter, correct, to the Cleveland Browns. So this is going to be one of those teams where if they win games, it's going to be because they put up a huge amount of points on the board. This is not going to be a team that is holding people to under 10 points. Kirk is going to have to sling the ball all over the field. And I think Jordan Addison could be the number one producing rookie wide receiver. I'm all in. Again, one of those names who you might not be able to start week 1 or 2, but from week 3, 4, 5 onwards, he will be a consistent starter for you like Olave was in 2022, like Garrett Wilson was in 2022. Okay, and my last certified my guy of the season is a running back. A lot of people aren't going to like this, but I think there's huge value with him. James Conner, currently my RB18. And he has a low of RB26 in ADP around the different platforms. What do we always preach in fantasy football, guys? We preach that volume is king. And people like to hear that until it's a bad offense. Let's look at this. James Conner on the Cardinals is clearly the number one, probably touch. Like, he will get the number one amount of touches on this team of any player. Heading into the NFL draft, I thought the Cardinals could draft a running back. They ended up not doing that. And when the dust settled, they didn't spend a single one of their 9 picks on a running back in a deep class. So now you look at this depth chart, it's James Conner, Keontae Ingram, who was a 6th-round pick last year. They had Marlon Mack. He just got injured. I mean, James Conner is going to eat so many touches in this offense. Outside of Keontae, there's Corey Clement, Tyson Williams. Regardless, barring an injury, he will be the number one running back for this team easily in 2023. The touches will absolutely be there. And for fantasy, he was really good last year on what was a pretty poor offense post Kyler Murray. Last year, he finished as a RB19. That's impressive on its own. But if you look at his 17 game pace, it's even more impressive. He missed 5 games due to an injury, but on a 17 game pace, he was on track to be the RB7 in fantasy football if you extrapolate his averages. Look, maybe you're sitting there and you're saying, I don't like it when people extrapolate averages. It's not reliable. I like points per game. Well, how about this? In fantasy points per game on a pretty bad Cardinals offense last year, James Conner had more points per game than Ramondre Stevenson, Aaron Jones, Leonard Fournette with Tom Brady, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook when he was the number one, Ken Walker, Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor. James Conner was the RB10 in points per game on a bad offense last year. And maybe you're saying, well, that's fine, but he had Kyler Murray last year. He doesn't have Kyler this year. I'll be the first to say, I have no idea when Kyler Murray is going to play. However, James Conner was actually even better for fantasy without Kyler Murray last year than he was with Kyler Murray. Check this out. So this is absolutely bonkers. But with Kyler Murray versus without, he goes up to 21.3 touches per game, right? 5 more touches per game. Targets per game go up a full target. His yards per game, almost 25 more yards per game. And his fantasy points per game, check this out. With Kyler Murray, the RB26 on a per game basis, without the RB3. And why would that be? Again, because volume is king. Everything is going to funnel through James Conner. The rushing attempts, the drop-offs, the 2-minute drives. When this team is down, when Colt McCoy is trying to find someone to dump the ball off to, James Conner, it's not sexy, but he will win some people leagues in 2023 if he stays healthy. So I'm a big fan of his current price point. And to finish the show, I wanted to tell you guys about 4 names that were honorable mentions that very easily could have been my guys. So I'm going to go ahead and say they are my guys. I just couldn't make the video about 10 people. Number 1, Calvin Ridley. I think he's absolutely going to have a bounce back. I'm all in. He's my wide receiver 12. Number 2, Treylon Burks. I'm a big fan of his talent, and I think that offense is going to be much better than people think. I think DeAndre Hopkins is going to take a lot of the coverage away, and Treylon Burks could absolutely thrive this year. Alexander Madison, another honorable mention, my guy. Without Dalvin Cook, every fantasy analyst for the past couple of years has told you he'll be a league winner, and now they're afraid to really back that up. I am not afraid to back that up. I will be drafting Alexander Madison in a lot of leagues. I'm a big fan of his value. And without Dalvin Cook, he was averaging over 20 fantasy points per game. Miles Sanders is the last guy I was going to tell you about. Again, similar to James Conner, it might not be a very good offense, but they are going to get a ton of touches. And if anything, at least the Carolina Panthers were good as a rushing team last year. I think they were top 10, I believe, in both rushing attempts per game and rushing yards. So a lot of information there. I really hope that you find this video helpful. You can disagree politely in the comments if you'd like, but I am all in on these 6, kind of 10, as I told you about my honorable mention names. And I really am looking forward to seeing what you guys think in the comments below. Drop a like to show some love. My throat is absolutely destroyed, so I'm going to go drink some water. But regardless, if you want to have your personal DM for fantasy advice this year, then go ahead and sign up with our code LAND to the Flock Fantasy website. Choose a Mother Flocker tier. You're going to unlock the Fantasy Hotline, which is a direct line to us for advice. Maybe you get a trade offer. Say, hey, Zach, what do you think about this trade offer? You unlock that kind of experience when you support us on the Flock Fantasy website, along with rankings for Dynasty, Redraft, Best Ball, articles, a whole bunch of bonus content. So thanks for watching. And hey, if you want to win some leagues this year, draft these players that I just talked about. And I wanted to get this video out a little bit earlier than I did last year. So hopefully none of these guys get injured. But best of luck, knock on wood. All right, enjoy the rest of your night or your day, wherever you are. Okay, see ya. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.